Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we begin with Part 1, Prefaces and Introduction, Book 1, Ancient Mysteries from Secret Societies of All Ages, Volume 1 by Charles William Heckethorn. From the extraordinary nature of the effects we may infer the extraordinary nature, grandeur and permanency of the causes, but their connection, varying predominance and mutual attraction escape all analysis. Mystery surrounds the obscure fecundation. Sects draw vigor from the most opposite sentiments. The most exalted as well as the meanest elements concur in forming this giant, a cyclopean and black fusion of all that seethes, boils, and ferments in the social viscera. The secret societies of all ages and countries. A comprehensive account of upwards of 160 secret organizations, religious, political, and social, from the most remote ages down to the present time, embracing the mysteries of ancient India, China, Japan, Egypt, Mexico, Peru, Greece, and Scandinavia, the Kabbalists, early Christians, heretics, assassins, thugs, Templars, the Vame and Inquisition, mystics, Rosicrucians, Illuminati, Freemasons, Scopsi, Camorristi, Carbonari, Nihilists, Fenians, French, Spanish, and other mysterious sects. By Charles William Heckethorn in 2 volumes, Volume 1, new edition, thoroughly revised and greatly enlarged. Preface to the new edition. This is not so much a second edition of my book on secret societies published in 1875 as an almost entirely new work. When the first edition was published, some of the societies had scarcely any history. Of the Nihilists, for instance, the account now given, recording their doings within the last 18 years, fills many pages of this work. The story of other societies active even then, such as the Fenians, had to be brought down to date and yielded much new matter. I've thought it desirable to give fuller particulars of certain societies than I had given in the first edition, such as the Jesuits. For instance, the new matter having either been kept back or being the result of further research. Accounts of societies not included in the first edition will be found here. I may instance Grata Repoa, Roshanaya, and Skopje. A few of the articles of the first edition have been reduced, such for instance as that on the Paris Commune, which has not now that immediate interest its then recent activity imparted to it. Great changes have also been made in the arrangement of the matter. Secret societies may be arranged either chronologically or locally or topically. Each arrangement has its advantages and disadvantages. The former are obvious, the latter may be stated thus. By arranging societies according to chronology, those which are topically connected or identical will sometimes be placed at so great a distance as to impair the continuity of interest. By arranging them locally, the chronological connection must suffer, and by arranging them according to subjects or topics, the reader obtains no clear view of the sequence of events. I have therefore endeavored to combine the 3 modes of representing the great drama of secret societies by making the topical arrangement its basis, and on that marshalling the societies first, according to locality, and lastly, according to time. Thus, in the first book of the work, the topic is Ancient Mysteries and Religious Societies. They are arranged according to localities, and the third consideration is the time. Therefore, the Eastern societies come first in chronological order, then the Western in the same order, so that the Magi of Persia form the first, and the Scandinavian drots of Europe the last in the list. A full list of authorities consulted being given, it has not been considered necessary to encumber the pages with footnotes. The general reader does not want them, and the student will know what work to refer to for verification. The work, as now presented to the public, is the result of 25 years' study and research involving the acquisition and collation of the English and foreign literature on the subject, and therefore claims to be a cyclopedia of secret societies, giving concise but quintessential details of all worth recording and omitting only those whose duration was ephemeral and action trivial. C.W.H. October 1896. Preface to the first edition. For many years, the fascinating subject of secret societies had engaged my attention, and it had long been my intention to collect in a comprehensive work all the information that could be gathered from numerous, often remote and sometimes almost inaccessible sources concerning one of the most curious phases of the history of mankind, those secret organizations religious, political, and social, which have existed from the most remote ages down to the present time. Before, however, I'd arranged and digested my materials, a review in the Athenseum, number 2196, directed my attention to the Italian work, Tu Mondo Secreto, by Signor de Castro, whom I have since then had the pleasure of meeting at Milan. I procured the book and intended at first to give a translation of it, but though I began as a translator, my labors speedily assumed a more independent form. Much, I found, had to be omitted from an original colored by a certain political bias, and somewhat too indulgent to various Italian political sects who, in many instances, were scarcely more than hordes of brigands. Much, on the other hand, had to be added from sources, chiefly English and German, unknown to the Italian author. Much had to be placed on a different basis and in another light. And again, many societies not mentioned by Signor de Castro had to be introduced to the reader, such as the Garduna, the Chauffeurs, Fenians, International, Okipar I, Ku Klux, Inquisition, Wahabees, so that with these additions and the amplifications of sections in the original Italian, forming frequently entirely new articles, the work, as it now is presented to the English public, though in its framework retaining much of its foreign prototype, may yet claim the merit of being not only essentially original, but the most comprehensive account of secret societies extant in English, French, German, or Italian, the leading languages of Europe. For whatever has been written on the subject in any one of them has been consulted and put under contribution. In English, there is no work that can at all compete with it, for the small book published in 1836 by Charles Knight and entitled Secret Societies of the Middle Ages embraces 4 societies only. The student who wishes for more ample information will have to consult the lists of authorities given at the head of each book, as it was thought best not to encumber the text with footnotes, which would have swelled the work to at least twice its present extent. The reader may rest satisfied that few statements are made which could not be supported by numerous and weighty authorities. Though dealing as we do here with societies whose very existence depended on secrecy, and which therefore, as a matter of policy, left behind them as little documentary evidence as possible, the old distich applies with peculiar force. What is hits is history, and what is missed is mystery. Again, bearing in mind that the imperative compass of the work exacted a concise setting forth of facts, ranging as the subject does over a surface so vast, I've been careful to interrupt the narrative only by such comments and reflections as would seem almost indispensable for clearing up obscurities or supplying missing historical links. It may at first appear as if some societies had improperly been inserted in this work as secret societies, the Freemasons, for instance. Members of secret associations, it might be objected, are not in the habit of proclaiming their membership to the world, but no Freemason is ashamed or afraid of avowing himself such. Nay, he is rather proud of the fact, and given to proclaim it somewhat obtrusively. Yet the most rabid Celt, who wishes to have a hand in the regeneration of his native land by joining the Fenian Brotherhood, has sense enough to keep his affiliation a profound secret from the uninitiated. But the rule I have followed in adopting societies as secret was to include in my collection all such as had or have secret rites and ceremonies kept from the outer world, though the existence of the society itself be no secret at all. In fact, no association of men can for any length of time remain a secret, since however anxious the members may be to shroud themselves in darkness and remain personally unknown, the purpose for which they band together must always betray itself by some overt acts, and wherever there is an act, the world surmises an agent. And if none that is visible can be found, a secret one is suspected. The thugs, for instance, had every desire to remain unknown, yet the fact of the existence of such a society was suspected long before any of its members were discovered. On the principle also of their being the propounders of secret doctrines, or doctrines clothed in language understood by the adepts alone, alchemists and mystics have found places in this work. And the Inquisition, though a state tribunal, had its secret agents and secret procedure, and may therefore justly be included in the category of secret societies. Secret societies, religious and political, are again springing up on many sides. The religious may be dismissed without comment, as they are generally without any novelty or significance. But those that have political objects ought not to be disregarded as without importance. The international Fenians, communists, Nihilists, Wahabees are secretly aiming at the overthrow of existing governments and the present order of things. The murders of Englishmen perpetrated by native Indians point to the machinations of secret societies in British India. Before the outbreak of the Great Indian Mutiny, English newspaper correspondents spoke rather contemptuously of some religious ceremony observed throughout British India of carrying small loaves from village to village. But this ceremony was the summons to the people to prepare for the general rising. Hence, the proceedings of the natives should be closely watched. November 1874. Introduction. Ignis ubique late, naturam amplectitur omnem cuncta parit, renovat, dividit, jurit, alit. Secret Societies. Introduction. 1. Intelligibility and nature of secret societies. Secret societies once were as necessary as open societies. The tree presupposes a root. Beside the empire of might, the idols of fortune, the fetishes of superstition, there must in every age and state have existed a place where the empire of might was at an end, where the idols were no longer worshipped, where the fetishes were derided. Such a place was the closet of the philosopher, the temple of the priest, the subterranean cave of the sectary. 2. Classification of secret societies. Secret societies may be classed under the following heads. 1. Religious, such as the Egyptian or Eleusinian mysteries. 2. Military, Knights Templars. 3. Judiciary, Vemgericta. 4. Scientific, alchemists. 5. Civil, Freemasons. 6. Political, Carbonari. 7. Antisocial, Garduna. But the line of division is not always strictly defined. Some that had scientific objects combined theological dogmas therewith, as the Rosicrucians, for instance. And political societies must necessarily influence civil life. We may therefore more conveniently range secret societies in the two comprehensive divisions of religious and political. 3. Religious societies. Religion has had its secret societies from the most ancient times. They date, in fact, from the period when the true religious knowledge, which, be it understood, consisted in the knowledge of the constitution of the universe and the eternal power that had produced and the laws that maintained it, possessed by the first men, began to decay among the general mass of mankind. The genuine knowledge was to a great extent preserved in the ancient mysteries, though even these were already a degree removed from the first primeval native wisdom, since they represented only the type instead of the archetype, namely the phenomena of outward temporal nature, instead of the realities of the inward eternal nature, of which this visible universe is the outward manifestation. Since the definition of this now recovered genuine knowledge is necessary for understanding much that was taught in the religious societies of antiquity, we shall further on enter into fuller details concerning it. 4. Political societies. Politically, secret societies were the provident temperers and safety valves of the present and the powerful levers of the future. Without them, the monologue of absolutism alone would occupy the drama of history, appearing moreover without an aim and producing no effect, if it had not exercised the will of man by inducing reaction and provoking resistance. Every secret society is an act of reflection, therefore, of conscience. For reflection accumulated and fixed is conscience. Insofar, secret societies are in a certain manner the expression of conscience in history. For every man has in himself a something which belongs to him and which yet seems as if it were not a thing within him, but so to speak, without him. This obscure something is stronger than he, and he cannot rebel against its dominion nor withdraw himself or fly from its search. This part of us is intangible. The assassin's steel, the executioner's axe cannot reach it. Allurements cannot seduce, prayers cannot soften, threats cannot terrify it. It creates in us a dualism, which makes itself felt as remorse. When man is virtuous, he feels himself one, at peace with himself. That obscure something does neither oppress nor torture him. Just as in physical nature, the powers of man's body, when working in harmony, are unfelt. But when his actions are evil, his better part rebels. Now, secret societies are the expression of this dualism reproduced on a grand scale in nations. They are that obscure something of politics acting in the public conscience and producing a remorse which shows itself as secret society, an avenging and purifying remorse. It regenerates through death and brings forth light through fire out of darkness according to eternal laws. No one discerns it, yet every man may feel it. It may be compared to an invisible star, whose light, however, reaches us, to the heat, coming from a region where no human foot will ever be placed, but which we feel and can demonstrate with the thermometer. Indeed, one of the most obvious sentiments that gives rise to secret societies is that of revenge, but good and wise revenge, different from personal rancor, unknown, where popular interests are in question, that desires to punish institutions and not individuals, to strike ideas and not men, the grand collective revenge, the inheritance that fathers transmit to their children, a pious legacy of love that sanctifies hatred and enlarges the responsibility and character of man. For there is a legitimate and necessary hatred, that of evil, which forms the salvation of nations. Woe to the people that knows not how to hate, because intolerance, hypocrisy, superstition, slavery are evil. 5. Aims of political societies. The aim of the sectaries is the erection of the ideal temple of progress, to fecundate in the bosom of sleeping or enslaved peoples the germs of a future liberty, as the Nihilists are now doing in Russia. This glorious edifice, it is true, is not yet finished and perhaps never will be, but the attempt itself invests secret societies with a moral grandeur, whereas without such aim their struggle would be debased into a paltry, egotistical party fight. It also explains and justifies the existence of secret societies, and to them many states owe not only their liberties but their very existence. As modern instances, I may mention Greece and Italy. 6. Religious secret societies. But the earliest secret societies were not formed for political so much as for religious purposes, embracing every art and science. Wherefore religion has truly been called the archaeology of human knowledge. Comparative mythology reduces all the apparently contradictory and opposite creeds to one primeval, fundamental and true comprehension of nature and her laws. All the metamorphoses of one or more gods recorded in the sacred books of the Hindus, Parsis, Egyptians, and of other nations are indeed founded on simple physical facts, disfigured and misrepresented, intentionally or accidentally. The true comprehension of nature was the prerogative of the most highly developed of all races of men, viz., the Aryan races, whose seat was on the highest point of the mountain region of Asia, to the north of the Himalayas. South of these lies the Vale of Kashmir, whose eternal spring, wonderful wealth of vegetation and general natural features best adapt it to represent the earthly paradise and the blissful residence of the most highly favored human beings. 7. Most perfect human type. So highly favored precisely because nature in so favored a spot could only develop in course of time a superior type, which being as it were the quintessence of that copious nature, was one with it and therefore able to apprehend it and its fullness. For as the powers of nature have brought forth plants and animals of different degrees of development and perfection, so they have produced various types of men in various stages of development, the most perfect being, as already mentioned, Eight. Causes of high mental development. I have already intimated that climatic and other outward circumstances are favorable to high development. This is universally known to be true of plants, but man is only a plant endowed with consciousness and mobility, and therefore it must be true of him, and in fact, experience proves it. As to how long it took man to arrive at a high state of mental development, it is sheer waste of time and ingenuity to speculate about how long did it take the spider to learn how to construct his web so skillfully, as it is a vain attempt to discover the time of man's first appearance and condition on earth. Even the stale cabbage of protoplasm warmed up by Darwin will not help us to solve the riddle. The only certainty we have from monumental and quasi-literary remains is that many thousand years ago, man possessed high scientific knowledge, which originally arisen in the East, gradually traveled westward, and on the journey to a great extent was lost. It may seem strange that such knowledge should be lost, but as we have a striking instance of such loss in historic times, the strange phenomenon becomes credible. What succeeded the splendors of classic erudition, science and art, but the mental night known as the Dark Ages, the outcome of priestly prejudice, oppression, and obscurantism. It will suffice to quote one fact in support of our argument. Thousands of years before our era, the Chaldeans were acquainted with the roundness of the earth, and that its extent from east to west was greater than that from north to south. They also knew its circumference, which they fixed by saying that a man, if he walked steadily on, could go round it in 1 year of 365 days. Now, reckoning the circumference at 24,900 miles, it is easily seen that a man walking at about 3 miles an hour would perform the journey within very little of a year. What had become of this knowledge when the learned friars, disputing at Salamanca with Columbus, maintained the earth to be flat? I have lying before me a map of Africa, printed in 1642 in Blau's Novus Atlas, in which the lakes in the interior of that continent, together with its rivers, towns, and villages, which are supposed to have been discovered in this century only, are accurately laid down. How came this knowledge, more than 250 years old, to be lost? But lost it was, for on maps issued in the early part of this century, the interior of Africa is a blank. Therefore, I am justified in saying that in prehistoric times, man possessed a true knowledge of nature and her workings, and that this is the reason why the mysteries of the most distant nations had so much in common, dogmatically and internally, and why in all so much importance was attached to certain figures and ideas, and why all were funereal. The sanctity attributed in all ages and all countries to the number 7 has not been correctly explained by any known writer. The elucidations I shall offer on this point will show that the conformity with each other of the religious and scientific doctrines of nations far apart must be due to their transmission from one common source, though the enigmatical and mystical forms in which this knowledge was preserved were gradually taken for the facts themselves. The reader will now see that these remarks, the object of which he may not have perceived at first, are not irrelevant. We cannot understand the origin and meaning of what was taught in the mysteries without a clear apprehension of man's primitive culture and knowledge. 9. Primitive culture. As a rule, prehistoric ages seem obscure, and men fancy that at every retrogressive step they must enter into greater darkness. But if we proceed with our eyes open, the darkness recedes like the horizon as we seem to approach it. New light is added to our light. New suns are lit up, new auroras arise before us. The darkness, which is only light compacted, is dissolved into its original, viz. Light. And as outwardness implies multiplicity and inwardness unity, there are many branches but only one root, so all religious creeds, even those most disguised in absurd and debasing rites and superstitions, the nearer we trace them to their source, appear in greater and greater purity and nobility, with more exalted views, doctrines, and aims. For as Tegner says, Kanslens Grunten are ander densamma, the fundamental tone of feeling is ever the same. And as the same poet expresses it, antiquity is det Atlantis som gick under med högre kraft, med adlar begar, that Atlantis that perished with higher powers and nobler aims. Thus, the ethic odes of Buddha and Zoroaster have been regarded as anticipations of the teaching of Christianity, so that even St. Augustine remarked, "What is now called the Christian religion existed among the ancients and was not absent from the beginning of the human race until Christ came, from which time the true religion which existed already began to be called Christian." Again, through all the more elevated creeds, there ran certain fundamental ideas which, differing and even sometimes distorted in form, may yet in a certain sense be regarded as common to all. Such were the belief in a Trinity, the dogma that the Logos, or omnific word, created all things by making the nothing manifest, the worship of light, the doctrine of regeneration by passing through the fire, and others. 10. The true doctrines of nature and being. But what was the knowledge on which the teaching of the mysteries was founded? It was no less than that of the ground and geniture of all things, the whole state, the rise, the workings, and the progress of all nature, together with the unity that pervades heaven and earth. A few years ago, this was proclaimed with great sound of trumpets as a new discovery, although so ancient an author as Homer speaks in the 8th book of the Iliad of the golden chain connecting heaven and earth, the golden chain of sympathy, the occult, all-pervading, all-uniting influence, called by a variety of names such as anima mundi, mercurius philosophorum, Jacob's ladder, the vital magnetic series, the magician's fire. This knowledge, in course of time and through man's love of change, was gradually distorted by perverse interpretations and overlaid or embroidered, as it were, with fanciful creations of man's own brain. And thus arose superstitious systems which became the creed of the unthinking crowd and have not lost their hold on the public mind, even to this day, keeping in spiritual thraldom myriads who tremble at 1,000 phantoms conjured up by priestcraft and their own ignorance, whilst felix qui potuit rerum cognoscere causas, atque metus omnes, et inexorabile fatum subjacit pedibus, strepitumque acerontis avari. 11. Fundamental principles of true knowledge possessed by the ancients. From what was taught in the mysteries, we are justified in believing that thousands of years ago men knew what follows. Though the knowledge is already dimmed and perverted in the mysteries, the phenomena of outward nature only being presented in them instead of the inward spiritual truths symbolized. 1. All around us we behold the evidences of a life permeating all things. We must needs therefore admit that there is a universal, all-powerful, all-sustaining life. 2. Behind or above the primeval life which is the basis of this system may be beheld the unmoved mover, the only supernatural ENS, who by the word or logos has spoken forth all things out of himself, which does not imply any pantheism, for the words of the speaker, though proceeding from him, are not the speaker himself. 3. The universal life is eternal. 4. Matter is eternal, for matter is the garment in which the life clothes and renders itself manifest. 5. That matter is light, for the darkest substance is or can be reduced into it. 6. Whatsoever is outwardly manifest must have existed ideally from all eternity in an archetypal figure reflected in what Indian mythology calls the eternal liberty, the mirror majat, whence are derived the terms magus, magia, magic, image, imagination, all implying the fixing of the primeval, structureless, imperceptible living matter in a form, figure, or creature. In modern theosophy, the mirror Maya is called the eternal mirror of wonders, the Virgin Sophia, ever bringing forth, yet ever a virgin, the analogue and prototype of the Virgin Mary. 7. The eternal life which thus manifests itself in this visible universe is ruled by the same laws that rule the invisible world of forces. 8. These laws, according to which the life manifests itself, are the 7 properties of eternal nature, 6 working properties, and the 7th in which the 6, as it were, rest or are combined into perfect balance or harmony, that is, paradise. These 7 properties, the foundation of all the septenary numbers running through natural phenomena and all ancient and modern knowledge, are 1. Attraction, 2. Reaction or repulsion, 3. Circulation, 4. Fire, 5. Light, 6. Sound, 7. Body or comprisal of all. 9. This septenary is divisible into 2 ternaries or poles, with the fire, symbolized by a cross, in the middle. These 2 poles constitute the eternal dualism or antagonism in nature, the first 3 forming matter or darkness, and producing pain and anguish, that is hell, cosmically winter, the last 3 being filled with light and delight, that is paradise, cosmically summer. 10. The fire is the great chymist or purifier and transmuter of nature, turning darkness into light. Hence the excessive veneration and universal worship paid to it by ancient nations, the priests of Zoroaster wearing a veil over their mouths for fear of polluting the fire with their breath. By the fire here, of course, is meant the Empyrean electric fire, whose existence and nature were tolerably well known to the ancients. They distinguished the moving principle from the thing moved, and called the former the igneous ether or spirit, the principle of life, the deity, Jupiter, Vulcan, Ptha, Kneph, 1824. 11. All light is born out of darkness and must pass through the fire to manifest itself. There is no other way but through darkness or death or hell, an idea which we find enunciated and represented in all the mysteries. As little as a plant can come forth into the beauty of blossoms, leaves, and fruit, without having passed through the dark state of the seed and being buried in the earth, where it is chemically transmuted by the fire. So little can the mind arrive at the fullness of knowledge and enlightenment without having passed through a stage of self-darkening and imprisonment, in which it suffered torment, anguish in which it was, as in a furnace, in the throes of generation. 12. Key to mystic teaching. That the first men possessed the knowledge of the foregoing facts is certain, not only from the positive and inferential teachings of the mysteries, but also from the monuments of antiquity, which in grandeur of conception and singleness of ideal aim excel all that modern art or industry or even faith has accomplished. By bearing this in mind, the reader will get a deeper insight into the true meaning of the dogmas of initiation than was attainable by the epochs themselves. He will also understand that the reason why there was so much uniformity in the teaching of the mysteries was the fact that the dogmas enunciated were explanations of universal natural phenomena, alike in all parts of the earth. In describing the ceremonies of initiation, I shall therefore abstain from appending to them a commentary or exegesis, but simply refer to the paragraphs of this introduction as to a key. 13. Mystic teaching summarized. It was theological, moral, and scientific. Theologically, the initiated were shown the error of vulgar polytheism and taught the doctrine of the unity and of a future state of reward and punishment. Morally, the precepts were summed up in the words of Confucius: "If thou be doubtful whether an action be right or wrong, abstain from it altogether." Scientifically, the principles were such as we have detailed above, with their natural and necessary deductions, consequences, and results. 14. How true knowledge came to be lost. Though I have already on several occasions, for example 10, alluded to the fact that the true knowledge of nature possessed by the first men had in course of time become corrupted and intermixed with error, it will not be amiss to show the process by which this came to pass. It is well known that the oldest religious rites of which we have any written records were Sabbasan or Helio-Archite. The sun, moon, and stars, however, to the true original epochs, were merely the outward manifestations and symbols of the inward powers of the eternal life. But such abstract truths could not be rendered intelligible to the vulgar mind of the multitude, necessarily more occupied with the satisfaction of material wants, and hence arose the personification of the heavenly bodies and terrestrial seasons depending on them. Gradually, the human figure, which in the first instance had only been a symbol, came to be looked upon as the representation of an individual being that had actually lived on earth. Thus, the sun, to the primitive men, was the outward manifestation of the eternal, all-sustaining, all-saving life. In different countries and ages, this power was personified under the names of Krishna, Fo, Osiris, Hermes, Hercules, and so on, and eventually these latter were supposed to have been men that really existed and had been deified on account of the benefits they had conferred on mankind. The tombs of these supposed gods were shown, such as the Great Pyramid, said to be the tomb of Osiris. Feasts were celebrated, the object of which seemed to be to renew every year the grief occasioned by their loss. The passing of the sun through the signs of the zodiac gave rise to the myths of the incantations of Vishnu, the labors of Hercules, his apparent loss of power during the winter season and the restoration thereof at the winter solstice, to the story of the death, descent into hell, and resurrection of Osiris and of Mithras. In fact, what was pure nature wisdom in one age became mythology in the next, and romance in the third, taking its characteristics from the country where it prevailed. The number 7 being found everywhere, and the knowledge that its prevalence was the necessary consequence of the 7 properties of nature being lost, it was supposed to have reference only to the 7 planets then known. 15. Original spirit of the mysteries and results of their decay. In the mysteries all was astronomical, but a deeper meaning lay hid under the astronomical symbols. While bewailing the loss of the sun, the epochs were in reality mourning the loss of that light whose influence is life. Whilst the working of the elements, according to the laws of elective affinity, produces only phenomena of decay and death. The initiated strove to pass from under the dominion of the bondwoman night into the glorious liberty of the free woman Sophia or light, to be mentally absorbed into the deity, that is, into the light. The dogmas of ancient nature wisdom were set before the pupil, but their understanding had to arise as inspiration in his soul. It was not the dead body of science that was surrendered to the epoch, leaving it to chance whether it quickened or not, but the living spirit itself was infused into him. But for this reason, because more had to be apprehended from within by inspiration than from without by oral instruction, the mysteries gradually decayed. The ideal yielded to the realistic, and the merely physical elements, Sabsaism and archism, became their leading features. The frequent emblems and mementos in the sanctuary of death and resurrection, pointing to the mystery that the moments of highest psychical enjoyment are the most destructive to bodily existence, that is, that the most intense delight is a glimpse of paradise. These emblems and mementos eventually were applied to outward nature only, and their misapprehension led to all the creeds or superstitions that have filled the earth with crime and woe, sanguinary wars, internecine cruelty, and persecution of every kind. Bloodthirsty fanatics disputing about words whose meaning they did not understand, maintaining antagonistic dogmas, false on both sides, have invented the most fiendish tortures to compel their opponents to adopt their own views. While the two Mohammedan sects of Omar and Ali will fight each other to decide whether ablution ought to commence at the wrist or the elbow, they will unite to slay or to convert the Christians. Nay, even these latter, divided into sects without number, have distinguished themselves by persecutions as cruel as any ever practiced by so-called pagan nations. Not satisfied with attempting to exterminate by fire and sword Turks and Jews, one Christian sect established such a tribunal as the Inquisition, whilst its opponents, scarcely less cruel, when they had the power, deprived the Roman Catholics of their civil rights and occasionally executed them. Their mutual hatred even attends them in their missionary efforts, very poor in their results, in spite of the sensational reports manufactured by the societies at home for extracting money from the public. To mention but one instance, a leading missionary endeavored to prejudice the Polynesians in advance against some expected Roman Catholic missionaries by translating Fox's Book of Martyrs into their language and illustrating its scenes by the aid of a magic lantern. 16. The mysteries under their astronomical aspect. But seeing that the mysteries as they have come down to us and are still perpetuated in a corrupted and aimless manner in Freemasonry have chiefly an astronomical bearing, a few general remarks on the leading principles of all will save a deal of needless repetition in describing them separately. In the most ancient Indian creed, we have the story of the fall of mankind by tasting of the fruit of the tree of knowledge and their consequent expulsion from paradise. This allegory was taken by the ignorant Jews for a record of actual occurrences, and as such interpolated in Genesis about 900 years after the composition of that book, and after all the other books of the Old Testament had been written, whence it becomes plain why, contrary to all expectation, the fall of man is never once alluded to in those books. Read in its mysterious and astronomical aspect. The narrative of the fall as given in the book of Genesis would assume some such form as the following. Adam, which does not mean an individual but the universal man, mankind, and his companion Eve, which means life, having passed spring and summer in the Garden of Eden, necessarily reached the season when the serpent, Typhon, the symbol of winter, points out on the celestial sphere that the reign of evil of winter is approaching. Allegorical science, which insinuated itself everywhere, caused malum, evil, also to mean an apple, the produce of autumn, which indicates that the harvest is over, and that man in the sweat of his brow must again till the earth. The cold season comes, and he must cover himself with the allegorical fig leaf. The sphere revolves, the man of the constellation Boots, the same as Adam, preceded by the woman, the virgin, carrying in her hand the autumnal branch laden with fruit, seems to be allured or beguiled by her. A look at a celestial globe will render this quite plain. A sacred bough or plant is introduced into all the mysteries. We have the Indian and Egyptian lotus, the fig tree of Attis, the myrtle of Venus, the mistletoe of the Druids, the golden bough of Virgil, the rose tree of Isis. In the golden ass, Apuleius is restored to his natural form by eating roses, the box of Palm Sunday, and the acacia of Freemasonry. The bough in the opera Roberto il Diavolo is the mystic bough of the mysteries. 17. Astronomical aspects continued the mysteries funereal. In all the mysteries we encounter a god, a superior being, or an extraordinary man, suffering death, to recommence a more glorious existence. Everywhere the remembrance of a grand and mournful event plunges the nations into grief and mourning, immediately followed by the most lively joy. Osiris is slain by Typhon, Uranus by Saturn, Susaman by Sudra, Adonis by a wild boar. Ormuzd is conquered by Arimanes, Attis and Mithras and Hercules kill themselves, Abel is slain by Cain, Balder by Loke, Bacchus by the giants. The Assyrians mourn the death of Tammuz, the Scythians and Phoenicians that of Acmon, all nature that of the great Pan, the Freemasons that of Hiram, and so on. The origin of this universal belief has already been pointed out. 18. Uniformity of dogmas. The doctrine of the unity and Trinity was inculcated in all the mysteries. In the most ancient religious creeds, we meet with the prototype of the Christian dogma, in which a virgin is seen bringing forth a Savior, and yet ever remaining a virgin. In the more outward sense, that virgin is the Virgo of the zodiac, and the Savior brought forth is the sun. In the most inward sense, it is the eternal ideal, wherein the eternal life and intelligence, the power of electricity and the virtue of the tincture, the first the sustainer, the latter the beautifier of apprehensible existence, are, as it were, corporified in the countless creatures that fill this universe, yea, in the universe itself. And the virgin remains a virgin, and her own nature is not affected by it, just as the air brings forth sounds, the light colors, the mind ideas, without any of them being intrinsically altered by the production. We certainly do not find these principles so fully and distinctly enunciated in the teaching of the ancient mystagogues, but a primitive knowledge of them may be inferred from what they did teach. In all the mysteries, light was represented as born out of darkness. Thus reappears the deity called now Maja Bhavani, now Kali, Isis, Ceres, Proserpina. Persephone, the queen of heaven, is the night from whose bosom issues life, into which the life returns, a secret reunion of life and death. She is moreover called the Rosy, and in the German myths the Rosy is called the restoring principle of life. She is not only the night, but as mother of the sun, she is also the aurora, behind whom the stars are shining. When she symbolizes the earth as Ceres, she is represented with ears of corn. Like the sad Proserpina, she is beautiful and lustrous, but also melancholy and black. Thus she joins night with day, joy with sadness, the sun with the moon, heat with humidity, the divine with the human. The ancient Egyptians often represented the deity by a black stone, and the black stone Kaaba, worshipped by the Arabs, and which is described as having originally been whiter than snow and more brilliant than the sun, embodies the same idea, with the additional hint that light was anterior to darkness. In all the mysteries, we meet with the cross as a symbol of purification and salvation. The numbers 3, 4, and 7 were sacred. In most of the mythologies, we meet with 2 pillars. Mystic banquets were common to all, as also the trials by fire, water, and air. The circle and triangle, single and double, everywhere represented the dualism or polarity of nature. In all the initiations, the aspirant represented the good principle, the light overcome by evil, the darkness, and his task was to regain his former supremacy, to be born again or regenerated by passing through death and hell and their terrors that were scenically enacted during the neophyte's passage through 7 caves, or ascent of 7 steps. All this, in its deepest meaning, represented the eternal struggle of light to free itself from the encumbrance of materiality it has put on in its passage through the first 3 properties of eternal nature. And in its secondary meaning, when the deeper one was lost to mankind, the progress of the sun through the 7 signs of the zodiac, from Aries to Libra, as shown in Royal Archmasonry, and also in the ladder with 7 steps of the Night of Kadosh. In all the mysteries, the officers were the same, and personified astronomical or cosmical phenomena. In all, the initiated recognized each other by signs and passwords. In all, the conditions for initiation were the same maturity of age and purity of conduct. Nero, on this account, did not dare, when in Greece, to offer himself as a candidate for initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries. In many, the chief hierophant was compelled to lead a retired life of perpetual celibacy, that he might be entirely at liberty to devote himself to the study and contemplation of celestial things. And to accomplish this abstraction, it was customary for the priests in the earlier periods of their history to mortify the flesh by the use of certain herbs, which were reputed to possess the virtue of repelling all passionate excitements, to guard against which they even occasionally adopted severer and more decided precautions. In all countries where mysteries existed, initiation came to be looked upon as much a necessity as afterwards baptism among Christians, which ceremony indeed is one that had been practiced in all the mysteries. The initiated were called epopts, that is, those that see things as they are, whilst before they were called maistes, meaning quite the contrary. In all we find greater and less mysteries, an exoteric and an esoteric doctrine, and 3 degrees. To betray the mysteries was everywhere considered infamous, and the heaviest penalties were attached to it. Hence, also, in all initiations, the candidate had to take the most terrible oaths that he would keep the secrets entrusted to him. Alcibiades was banished and consigned to the Furies for having revealed the mysteries of Ceres. Prometheus, Tantalus, Oedipus, Orpheus suffered various punishments for the same reason. 19. Most Ancient Secret Society. The very contents of this work show that the records of ancient secret societies have come down to us in pretty full detail. Yet on looking at a map of the ancient world, we are struck by a fact, which can only be explained by assuming the existence at a remote period of a secret society of which no record except the one supplied by the map exists. This secret society, whose existence, it is true, can be proved inferentially only, must have been that of Benjamin and his 10 sons. We know from Genesis 47 that Joseph delegated to the Benjaminites the keeping of all the cattle of Egypt, which conferred on them vast powers their warlike spirit knew how to utilize for their own aggrandizement. And that they must have acted in concert is proved, inferentially as stated above, by the names of European and other countries. The proof is founded on etymology. This science is not always reliable when we have only 1 or 2 roots to guide us. But when we come to 5 or more, a suspicion of mere coincidence must be dismissed from the mind. The subjoined names of Benjamin and his 10 sons, together with those of the countries or localities named after them, will make the matter clear. Seen here. That all these countries should have Benjaminite names proves an identity of purpose at some long past period. And as no Benjaminite sovereignty has ever been proclaimed over Europe, it is clear that the above result must have been brought about by a powerful secret society, the leaders of which were Benjamin and his 10 sons. And to carry out their scheme, and to do so without the kings and politicians, not associated with them, detecting its origin, they must have had signs and passwords known only to the initiated. It is indisputable that pneuma, the Greek word for spirit or ghost, is derived from Benim or Benjamin, as Christ is derived from Geras. Hence, Christ is said to have been begotten by the Holy Ghost. 20. Secret societies no longer needed. Thanks to secret societies themselves, they are now no longer needed, at least not in the realms of thought. In politics, however, circumstances will arise in every age to call them into existence. And though they seldom attain their direct object, yet are they not without influence on the relations between ruler and ruled, advantageously for the latter in the long run, though not immediately. But thought, religious, philosophical, and political, is free, if not as yet in every country. It is so certainly in the lands inhabited by the Saxon races. And though the bigot and the fool would crush it, the former because it undermines his absolutism, and the latter because it interferes with his ease, yet shall it only grow stronger by the opposition. Science becomes the powerful bulwark against the invasion of dogmatic absurdities, and there is growing up a scientific church wherein knowledge and not humility, labor and not penance and fasting are considered essentials. Various phenomena in modern life are proofs of this. Man, during ages of intellectual gloom, annihilated himself in behalf of the great deified all. Now he studies and respects himself, destroys the fetishes, and combats for truth, which is the true deity. In ancient times, the mind rose from religion to philosophy. In our times, by a violent reaction, it will ascend from philosophy to religion. And the men whose religion is so arrived at, whose universal sympathy has cast out fear, such men are the true regenerators of mankind, and need neither secret signs nor passwords to recognize each other. In fact, they are opposed to all such devices because they know that liberty consists in publicity. In a despotically ruled country, as Russia for instance, secret societies are even now the only means of stirring up the people to fight for freedom. But wherever liberty rules, secrecy is no longer necessary to effect any good and useful work. Once it needed secret societies in order to triumph, now it wants open union to maintain itself. Not that the time is come when every truth may be uttered without fear of calumny and cavil and opposition, especially in religious matters. Far from it, as some recent notable instances have shown. The words of Faust still have their application. Who dare call the child by its right name? the few that knew something of it and foolishly opened their hearts, revealing to the vulgar crowd their views, were ever crucified or burnt. Certes, bodily crucifying or burning are out of the question now, but statecraft and especially priestcraft still have a few thumbscrews and red-hot irons to hold a man's hands or sear his reputation. Wherefore, though I doubt the policy and in most cases the success of secret associations, yet I cannot withhold my tribute of admiration for those who have acted or do act up to the words of the poet Lowell. They are slaves who dare not speak for the fallen and the weak. They are slaves who will not choose hatred, scoffing, and abuse, rather than in silence shrink from the truth they needs must think. They are slaves who dare not be in the right with two or three. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.